It's amazing that people can come up with thousands of excuses for their infidelity, but I believe that nothing justifies adultery, except of course when it happens without the will of a person. I accidentally saw through the window how my wife was cheating on me with some guy, and then my anger knew no bounds. You think it's simple for me to talk about this? Well, just leave me alone. I apologize for that outburst, but I'm still grappling with the pain and anger that linger, even after all this time. My life was wonderful, until I discovered my wife was gifted. I never imagined I could live with her being gifted, yet I still struggle to accept Shona's pride and joy in her giftedness. She saw it as a blessing, oblivious to the curse it truly was. Shona Mackey and I first met years ago while working at a national telecoms company in Inverness. She worked as a dispatcher, and I was a telephone engineer. I fell in love with her gentle Highland accent before I even saw her. It didn't hurt that she turned out to be a charming redhead with a mischievous smile, twinkling eyes, and adorable freckles. She told me she was initially drawn to me because my name is Rob Roy McGregor, like the famous Scottish outlaw from the late 17th century. Perhaps she enjoyed the challenge of taming an outlaw. My work took me all over the Scottish Highlands, installing and maintaining masts and receivers for faster broadband access. My boss joked that I was improving the lives of sheep by offering adult films to farmers. But that wasn't why I loved my job. It wasn't just what I did that motivated me. It was the places I did it in. The Scottish Highlands were my office, blending breathtaking landscapes with clean air and a soft quality of light that lifts the spirit. After our son Robbie was born, Shona quickly convinced me to move back to her hometown of Lochmagandy. Looking back, I regret agreeing to relocate, not because of the location itself, which is beautiful. Shona's mother and sister lived nearby, always available to babysit Robbie when needed, whether for a day, an evening, or a weekend. Unfortunately, what I didn't anticipate was Shona becoming deeply immersed in the dynamics of a tightly knit matriarchal community. Here, women wield significant influence, while men often spend their leisure time at the village pub, chatting over whiskey and beer about mundane topics like the weather or sheep prices. On sunny days, Lochmagandy appears idyllic, with its white-walled cottages scattered across the hillsides, and the village itself nestled around a quaint square at the head of the loch. The settlement and its surrounding crofts are shielded on three sides by the Hoch Magandy, a ring of high hills that protect Glen Magandy from harsh weather. It's undeniably a picturesque setting, but when clouds obscure the hilltops and darken the skies, the atmosphere turns gloomy and somber. On those days, it's easy to entertain the local legend that the loch is haunted by the restless spirit of Morag MacDarrell, a young woman who allegedly suffered a tragic fate in 1744, drowned after a brutal assault. The exact details of her story remain shrouded in mystery, passed down through generations, a legacy that would eventually bring me sorrow. Morag, by all accounts, was an energetic young woman of extraordinary beauty. She lived in a harsh and cruel era. Although her exact age at the time of her tragic death remains unknown, history suggests that her innocent flirtation with local young people became problematic. Hoping to find a husband, she flirted naively, unaware that some young men resented her teasing. One summer evening, as she was returning from the fields to her parents' farm, 4 young men ambushed her. They gagged her to stifle her screams and dragged her into a thicket of purple heather by the lake. They probably underestimated her strength as she was desperately fighting to protect herself. Later, it was determined from the scratches on their hands and faces that they were criminals. Morag was attacked and seriously injured. That night, her father's search party found her in the water. It was initially assumed that she drowned accidentally, as if she drowned while swimming in the lake on her way home, but the truth soon came out. The young men claimed that Mary was voluntarily close to them, and then they left her alone to wash in the lake. They maintained they were unaware of how she drowned, or the cause of the bruises on her face and arms. Losing 4 young men from the small Highland village would have posed significant challenges for the community. Donald MacDarrell, the clan chieftain, was reluctant to let that happen. Acting simultaneously as a judge and jury, he died along with the young people, declaring the accusation of terrible actions. None of the young men were punished after Morag's death. Instead, they continued working the land as usual, while the local women muttered and grumbled among themselves about old Donald's failure to punish the guilty. Throughout the following winter, the community often discussed the possible consequences of such a serious miscarriage of justice. Highlanders, who are closely connected to their natural surroundings, are often very superstitious. Most locals believed that Morag's spirit would be unable to rest in peace, that the loch was now haunted, and that the guilty would be cursed by fate. Donald MacDarrell, the chieftain who failed in his duty to administer justice, soon met a grisly end. He and his MacDarrell clansmen, including Morag's murderers, joined Bonnie Prince Charlie's army in 1745. At the Battle of Culloden on April 16, 1746, they were among the Highlanders charging at the redcoats of Prince William, the Duke of Cumberland. Donald and the young men who had raped and murdered Morag met terrible deaths. Shot or bayoneted, they were systematically slaughtered like animals by the soldiers of Butcher Cumberland as they lay wounded and screaming in agony after the battle. The women of the glen were overwhelmed with grief. In addition to losing most of their men, there was a real possibility that their fragile economy would collapse, leading them to either starve or be forced to leave the valley, resorting to begging in cities on the plains to survive. That they managed to overcome these odds and save their community is a testament to their strong will and determination to survive, as well as their willingness to take desperate measures. With no adult males left, old MacDarrell's widow assumed the chieftainship of the clan. She and some of the other women traveled to Inverness and successfully arranged a meeting with Butcher Cumberland and General George Wade. What exactly transpired at that meeting is unknown, but the future of Glen Magandy was secured shortly afterward when General Wade designated the glen as a staging post and supply depot for the British Army. The single road in and out of the glen made it easily defensible, which likely influenced Wade's decision. However, it appears that the women of the glen also promised General Wade that soldiers temporarily stationed there would be made very welcome. Indeed, by the late 18th century, the name of the towering mountain range of Hoch Magandy had become synonymous with wild and probably illicit intimacy, giving rise to the slang expression, to have some Hoch Magandy. Many Highlanders viewed the actions of the women of Glen Magandy as shameful, while others saw them as a practical and necessary strategy given the lack of alternatives. Soldiers came and went, and the seeds of the community's recovery were planted, quite literally. Unlike other parts of the Highlands that became depopulated, Glen Magandy thrived. The women enjoyed the undisturbed tranquility of the glen and made a living by producing beautiful hand-woven woolen garments that quickly became highly sought after in Edinburgh and London. A new generation of children, including many with mixed redcoat and MacDarrell heritage, grew up in a matriarchal society where the chieftainship was passed from eldest daughter to eldest daughter. Aware of Morag MacDarrell's fate, the women of the glen also took measures they believed would eliminate the risk of any similar sexually motivated aggression in the future. We had been living in Loch Magandia for about 5 years and were approaching our 7th wedding anniversary when my life changed dramatically for the worse. I was as pleased as I could be when spring turned to summer that year. Every time I returned from a few days on the road, Shauna's affection overwhelmed me. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. She kissed me more and more often, ran her fingers through my hair, touched my arm, stroked my shoulder, and snuggled up to me when she had the opportunity. These gestures often led to us making love. It reminded me of how she was when we first met, and I was glad she was trying to be more romantic. That Friday was pretty typical. Little Robbie went to a sleepover party with Aunt Maggie and Uncle Duncan to visit his cousin Malcolm, also a 6-year-old boy with copper hair. We called them Red Nuts. After a week-long technical inspection in the north, I stopped by to say hello to Robbie and thank Maggie and Duncan for giving Shauna and me the opportunity to be alone. Robbie hugged me quickly, but he wanted to play with Malcolm more. I remember thinking that they would probably remain best friends forever. When I arrived home, the delightful aroma of beef stew with wild mountain thyme was drifting from the kitchen. Shona was busy setting the table in the dining room. She had added a couple of tall candles, which usually signaled she was in the mood for some romance, and there was an open bottle of Côtes du Rhône on the table. She brought me a cold beer while I hung up my coat and placed my dirty laundry in the basket. After a week of working away from home, it always takes me about half an hour to relax and adjust back to the home environment. Shona understood this and didn't expect me to engage in meaningful conversation right away. Instead, she filled the silence by telling me all about her day, her week, and the latest gossip. I was relaxing with my beer while she busied herself in the kitchen, stirring the stew and warming plates in the top oven, chattering about the tsili that was set to take place the next evening. The tsili was to celebrate Callum McDarrell's 18th birthday, whose mother was the Lady Chieftain. There would be a top-class fiddle band and Scottish country dancing. People were coming from miles around, and the village hall would be bustling with folks of all ages, from toddlers to elderly pensioners. Shona had become good friends with Fiona, the Lady Chieftain, and had been helping Fiona and her husband Dougal to organize the Sealith. In recent weeks, Shona seemed to be at their place every time I called her while I was away from home. She was extremely excited about the preparations for Callum's birthday celebration and had mentioned more than once what an honor it was to be chosen to help. Over dinner, she talked about how wonderful the next day would be and how amazing it was that Callum had grown up so quickly and would turn 18 tomorrow. She bought him a gold signet ring with the intertwined initials CS engraved on it, and showed it to me that evening after dinner, when we were sitting in the living room drinking whiskey from the nearby Glenfarclas distillery. "So why don't you take care of Callum McDarrell?" I asked. "Oh, right. Well, Stuart is his middle name," she replied quickly, snapping the red velvet box shut and placing it on the coffee table. I didn't think much of it at the time because she gave me one of her special looks. Her sparkling eyes and mischievous smile indicated that she was ready to go to bed. Cottages in the Highlands are usually single-story, and ours was no exception, so there was no need to climb the stairs, and soon we were lying under the sheets on our large double bed. I hugged her and kissed her. Then it turned into a pleasant intimacy. She whispered. "Thanks, Rob. It was really something. I love you so much." "I love you too," I whispered back, pulling the sheet over us. With Robbie away for the night, I had hoped for a leisurely morning of lovemaking that Saturday. But Shona woke up early, leaving me to snooze while she showered and got dressed. "Morning, lazy bones," she greeted me as I sat up in bed watching her primp in front of the mirror. "I'm heading over to Fiona's, but I'll stop by the bakery on my way back to get us some breakfast rolls. You can have a long lie-in for once, and we can pick up Robbie after breakfast." I considered staying in bed after she left, but decided to get up and tackle some household chores. After a quick shower, I changed into jeans and my favorite green and black checked casual shirt, loaded the washing machine, and tidied up the lounge before starting on the rest of the house. On the coffee table was the little red box with the signet ring, along with an envelope addressed to Callum McDarrell, likely containing a birthday card. Shona had apparently forgotten to take them with her. We could have given them to Callum that evening, but it seemed simpler to take them over right away. The chieftain's cottage, though isolated in the middle of the land, legally bound to the chieftainship, was less than a mile away if I took a shortcut across the fields. The fresh air would help clear my head after the Balvenie from the night before. As I walked through the fields of long, lush meadow grass loved by the sheep, I could see the village on the shore of the loch in the distance. After scrambling over a couple of dry stone walls, it took me about 20 minutes to reach the stone barn next to the cottage. To get to the front door, I had to go around the back of the barn and down the north side of the cottage. The chief's cottage is a traditional Highland cottage, long and low, with thick whitewashed walls and a black slate roof that was originally thatched. Built more than 200 years ago, it was designed in such a way as to minimize heat loss, as a result of which the windows became very small, especially on the north and west sides, which face the prevailing wind and weather. However, as I walked along the north side of the cottage, the window I passed was still large enough for me to catch a glimpse of my wife, and it made me freeze in place. It was clearly a bedroom, and she was lying on a large double bed and cheating on me. She didn't see me because I was looking at her from the left, and her long red hair was flying. I do not know how long I stood there, unable to move. It seemed to me that time had stopped. At first I couldn't see who the man was because his back was to me, but then I recognized Callum McDarrell. He had a big smile on his face. There could be no mistake. He was only doing with my wife what was allowed only to me. What the hell? I tore myself away from the window and leaned against the wall of the cottage outside, almost suffocating. I realized that I was holding my breath, watching the terrifying scene unfolding in front of me. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed it. Now I felt sick. My mind and body were struggling to understand and react. I bent over, breathing deeply, trying to regain control. I was standing there, not knowing how much time had passed, maybe a couple of minutes. I was shocked, but my education as a maintenance engineer taught me how to handle difficult situations calmly. Acting on impulse was not my style. I couldn't understand why Shauna would betray me with Callum, but I knew that immediate retaliation could hurt others, especially little Robbie, who was my main concern. Before taking decisive action, I needed to better understand what was going on. As I trudged home, I tried to stay away from the chief's house so that I would not be noticed behind the barn and a small group of pines, although the probability of this was low. My thoughts were chaotic and confused. It seemed obvious that Shauna had planned this meeting. Ironically, it was precisely because I decided not to lie in bed, but instead deliver a forgotten postcard and gift, that I stumbled upon them. Maybe Shauna was so busy organizing her connection with Callum that she didn't notice the postcard and the signet ring. Their date looked passionate. Maybe it was his first time. Or had they been dating for a while? They were in his bedroom at his parents' house. Did his parents know about my wife's affair with their son? It was a significant day in his life. I could not imagine that they were absent that morning. If they weren't distracted, they must have known about what was going on. I was taken aback, disoriented, and furious. I knew I couldn't confront Shauna immediately. I needed time to collect my thoughts. Upon returning home, I placed the card and gift intended for Callum back on the coffee table. In the kitchen, I left a note for Shauna explaining that I had taken advantage of the dry weather to go for a walk up Hook Magdi. She knew I often did this, packing a lunch for the 12-mile trek that typically circuited the 3 highest peaks in about 6 hours. For the next few hours, I threw myself into hill walking, focusing all my energy on the climb. The breathtaking views from those lofty summits helped me to regain some composure and begin to recover from the shock of my wife's betrayal. By late afternoon, as I headed back home, I was still uncertain about what to do next. While dwelling on past mistakes seemed futile, I knew I would have to reassess the nature of our relationship and possibly make some difficult decisions. I was certain of one thing. I wouldn't cause any trouble or confrontations before the Sealith that evening. In tight-knit Highland communities, gossip spreads quickly. Everyone takes an interest in comparing notes and spreading conjecture, rumors, and falsehoods. I didn't want our personal matters to involve the wider community. Sealiths are breeding grounds for gossip, where busybodies thrive on bits of information like a missing husband, a upset wife, or a birthday boy who got into a scuffle. The walk in the hills helped clear my mind. But returning that afternoon, I still found it hard to face Shauna. Thankfully, Robbie provided a welcome distraction, sitting beside me on the couch and excitedly recounting his day with his cousin. The highlight was discovering snails in the garden, which led to a lively discussion about snails versus slugs. For a 6-year-old, Robbie showed impressive knowledge about nature, including how snails protect themselves with shells. Shauna prepared Aberdeen Angus burgers, and we sat down to eat around 6 o'clock. which was late enough for Robbie. Conversation centered around the Sealy, scheduled to start early to accommodate young attendees. Robbie and I would wear our red McGregor kilts, and all three of us planned to attend when festivities began around 7 that evening. Robbie was especially looking forward to a clown performing magic tricks for the children while the adults socialized with drinks. We hadn't decided how long we'd stay. That would depend on Robbie's mood. Scottish country dancing provides a delightful opportunity for everyone to dance and socialize with various partners. Similar traditions exist worldwide, such as circle dances, barn dances, and line dancing. In a tight-knit community like Lochmagandy, nearly everyone dances with each other, as was evident that evening. The Tele began with children attempting simpler dances, often assisted by their parents and grandparents. Robbie particularly enjoyed the Dashing White Sergeant, a dance he had practiced at school. As a family trio, we energetically moved around the hall, joining sets of 6 with each rotation, greeting the next trio approaching us. Dancing with Robbie, we appeared as though we were perfectly synchronized. Yet inwardly, I struggled to maintain the facade of a contented family. Despite whatever she had been occupied with earlier that day, Shona showed no signs of worry or preoccupation. She beamed with smiles towards everyone, relishing the compliments about our talented son and our cohesive dance performance. I kept watching for any hint that she might seek out Callum McDarrell, but besides greeting him and presenting him with a birthday card and gift upon our arrival, she avoided him with great care. No one, including myself, would have suspected anything between them, leading me to question whether it had been a one-time occurrence. As expected, Robbie started to get tired as the evening progressed. Shona had kept an eye on him most of the time while he played with some of his young friends, including Malcolm. I thought she might want me to take Robbie home so she could flirt and dance with Callum. However, I was surprised when she arranged for Robbie and Callum to have a sleepover at our place. Shona and Maggie took the 2 boys back to our place around 9:30. Maggie returned to the Siley about half an hour later. She explained that she and Shona had agreed to take turns babysitting, each getting an hour to enjoy themselves at the Siley while the other watched the boys. This meant Shona would return in about an hour, when Maggie took over. I danced with Maggie and some of the other women, trying to appear relaxed despite the challenging conversation due to the music. Eventually, I found myself on the edge of the crowd, sipping my beer and enjoying the fiddle band as they played reels, strathspeys, and jigs. While I was mostly focused on the band, I was also vigilant for any signs that someone might know about my wife's infidelity. I couldn't be certain. At times, I wondered if some of the women were aware of something. A few glanced in my direction, but I thought they might just be checking me out. Callum McDarrell had enjoyed his fair share of dancing. Granny's aunts and his mother's friends took turns dancing with the birthday boy. The men took turns buying him drinks whenever he got a break from the women. He was clearly well-liked and polite, and under different circumstances, I might have bought him a drink too. But now, that was never going to happen. While waiting to order a beer at the bar, I happened to stand next to Dougal, Callum's father. Unsure if he knew about Callum and Shona, I saw a chance to uncover part of the mystery. "You must be proud of Callum, Dougal," I said, smiling at him. "Well, I suppose so," he replied. "Can I ask if Callum is named after someone in the family?" I inquired. "Aye. He's named after his maternal grandfather," Dougal answered. "Does he have your name as his middle name then, Dougal?" "No, it's Hector, after his paternal grandfather," Dougal clarified. "How fascinating," I responded. "Are these gentlemen here with us tonight?" "In spirit, perhaps," he said. "Both are far away. Grandpa Callum moved to Canada years ago, and Grandad Hector lives with my sister's family in Australia. It's a shame they're missing such a good Sealy, but perhaps it can't be helped," I remarked, concluding our brief conversation as I paid for my beer. Dougal unwittingly provided evidence that Shona and Callum's encounter that morning wasn't likely spontaneous. The C on the gold signet ring surely stood for Callum, but it seemed probable the S stood for Shona. To me, those intertwined letters might as well have spelled out cuckolding. My mood didn't brighten when my wife reappeared just past 11 o'clock. She scanned the hall, briefly waved at me, then made a beeline for Callum McDarrell. Could this be the moment they had been eagerly awaiting all evening? Ostensibly, she was simply taking her turn to dance with the birthday boy, but the broad smiles of anticipation on their faces left little doubt in my mind. Had I not been watching for telltale signs on others' faces, I might have missed it entirely. Those who were aware of something brewing couldn't resist stealing glances in my direction as they observed the dancing couple. Even my mother-in-law and sister-in-law joined in, surely finding amusement in the irony of my wife dancing with her young admirer while I remained oblivious. Maintaining my composure, I kept a neutral expression until I finally decided to step outside, only when Shona and Callum continued dancing beyond their second round. Someone must have suspected that I was aware of the situation. As I stood outside in the darkness trying to comprehend the fact that it seemed half of Lochmagandy knew I had been betrayed, Dougal approached me. "You don't look happy, Rob. What's wrong?" he asked. "Your son and my wife," I replied. "So you found out. Fiona thought you might catch on. Please don't cause a scene tonight. Fiona would like to talk to you tomorrow morning about this. Tell Shona you're not feeling well, then come over to our place when she takes wee Robbie to church. It's really important you hear Fiona out. Can I tell her you'll be there?" He looked at me with concern as I deliberated on my response. "To be honest, Dougal, I'm not sure it will make much difference, but I suppose I can wait until then. I don't intend to create a scene, as you said. Just keep your son away from my wife. I don't know how many people know about them, but it would be better if they don't spend the evening in each other's arms on the dance floor. It's too painful for me to bear." "Thank you, Rob. I'll ask Fiona to talk to Callum privately." After waiting 5 minutes, I returned to the Sealid. Shona was dancing with Duncan, her brother-in-law. Callum was dancing with Heather, his older sister, a 22-year-old with black hair, next in line to become Lady Chieftain, studying accounting and finance at UHI in Inverness. When their dance ended, Shona came over giving me a hug and a kiss, clearly happy and unaware that I knew about her affair with Callum. Later that evening, we danced together and walked back to our cottage arm in arm. I tried to act normally, listening to Shona talk enthusiastically about the Sealid's success, who attended, their enjoyment, and praising the band. I held my tongue, occasionally responding with "I" or "right." Maggie was glad to see us and agreed we could take both boys to church the next morning, while Malcolm would join his parents. After checking on the boys, Shona went straight to bed and seemed asleep before I finished in the bathroom. I lay awake, pondering what the clan chieftain might say to change my mindset. I believed my marriage was critically wounded, and doubted Lady Fiona could save it. You can't undo infidelity, and I didn't think anything Fiona had to say would rescue my marriage. Shona prepared breakfast the following morning and took the boys to church by herself after I mentioned having a headache and needing some fresh air. As the devout villagers of Lochmagandy filled the village church that Sabbath morning, I retraced the path of heartbreak I had walked just 24 hours earlier. Soon I arrived at the chieftain's cottage. Fiona greeted me at the door. "Thank you for coming, Rob," she said, leading me into the living room. "The others are at church, so we can talk undisturbed. I've boiled the kettle and can make us tea. Or would you prefer a nip of whiskey?" Tea was the last thing on my mind, but refusing would have been rude, especially given the difficult conversation ahead. Fiona brought the tea, and eventually we settled into wing-back chairs across from each other by the fireplace. I wasn't sure what Fiona wanted to say and waited for her to begin. "I want to start by apologizing for what you've learned about Shona and Callum," she said with genuine concern in her voice. "Can I ask how you found out? Did someone tell you?" I struggled to keep my composure, especially in front of Robbie and Malcolm, but my anger must have been evident to Fiona. "How I found out doesn't matter, Fiona," I replied sharply. "No one informed me, although it seems many people know that your son had an affair with my wife." Rob, it's more complicated than that, she replied. I have a lot to explain, and I really need you to listen to me. I will try to answer any of your questions. The only thing I ask is that you promise to listen to everything I have to say before making any decisions. Can you do that? All right, Fiona, come on, tell your story, but I doubt it will change anything. Thanks, Rob. I won't deny that Shauna and Callum were close. But you don't know that Glen Magandhi has a tradition. It's not about talent or divine gifts. She says that women become a gift to young people when they come of age. Wait a minute, Fiona, I interrupted, caught off guard. Are you saying that Shauna and Callum were together because it was some kind of tradition or ritual when he turned 18? Yes, Rob, in fact it is, she confirmed. You see, the tradition of giving gifts to women in Glen Magandhi originated after the unpleasant story with Morag McDarrell. Everyone knows her story, and how the women of Glen Magandhi took power into their own hands after 1745. They did everything necessary to rebuild the community and ensure its prosperity. They invited red-coated soldiers into their beds, but many do not realize that they also made sure that the young women of the Glen would never again be vulnerable to young chauvinist men with uncontrollable desires. Let me get this straight, Fiona. Are you saying that it wasn't enough for the older women to just be with the soldiers? They also socialized with local young people? Rob, you're deliberately distorting what I'm saying. It wasn't like that at all. These women arranged to be given to their sons when they turned 18. It was a gesture of appreciation for their good behavior in childhood. Initially, these women were spinsters or widows of men who died in wars. For years, the men of Glen Magandhi have sought opportunities in North America, where they have fought in various conflicts against the French, Native American Indians, Santa Anna and its Mexicans, and even against each other in the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War. In quieter times, they joined the California Gold Rush, often unaccompanied by women. The 20th century brought with it new wars such as the Boer War in South Africa, World War I, the Spanish Civil War, World War II, and the Korean War in the 50s. During these 2 centuries, there has never been a shortage of unmarried women who could be married off. I asked, if only unmarried women participate in this tradition, how did Shauna end up being chosen? All women in the Glen are expected to uphold the tradition and be open to being chosen, she explained. These days, thankfully, our men aren't away at war as much, so there are fewer widows or single women in our community. Instead, those chosen are often married to men who are frequently away from home. They might work on oil rigs in the North Sea for weeks or commute to Glasgow or Edinburgh from Monday to Friday. The key is that the chosen woman can make herself available without disrupting her home life. This whole setup sounds like an excuse for older women to have affairs with younger men, I remarked. Not at all, she replied. Are you speaking from experience then, Fiona? Have you been chosen? I asked. I probably shouldn't answer, but I'll reassure you, Rob. Yes, I have been chosen many years ago, but I won't say more than that. A chosen woman and her young man are expected to behave responsibly and keep their relationship discreet. Shauna and Callum should have been more discreet last night. So you're saying that Shauna expressed her willingness to enter into a relationship with Callum, but they should have been more circumspect. Rob, it's not just about intimacy. The gifting is done with care and affection. There's a 3-month courting period before the young man turns 18. During this time, the couple meets frequently to get to know each other, discussing important life matters and the young man's future plans. During this period, there is no physical activity, although they can hold hands and kissing is allowed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No wonder my wife had been visiting Fiona's cottage so often lately. She had been meeting with Callum. But that makes it worse, I protested. You're telling me it's a full-blown romantic affair, not just a casual encounter. The only saving grace might have been if it were some spontaneous, unforeseen event, a one-time mistake. Fiona paused, as if considering her response carefully. I understand this is hard for you to grasp, Rob, But Shona and Callum's relationship isn't an affair and poses no threat to your marriage. Callum needs to learn about relationships and women, and Shona is a caring person who has taken on the responsibility to guide him. We all hoped you wouldn't find out about Shona being gifted, but you need to understand that gifting women is a long-standing tradition in our community. It has broad support, and the gifted women are highly respected. That might be true, I replied, but who is responsible for this situation? Who arranged this match? Who determines which woman should be involved? A young man might express a preference for a specific woman, but the ultimate decision rests with the clan chief, she said, meeting my gaze directly. It's always a carefully considered choice, and neither the woman nor the young man is forced into a relationship. So, let me guess then, I retorted, trying to control my anger. Callum told you he wanted to be intimate with my wife, you asked her, and she agreed? That's a very blunt way of putting it, Rob, she countered. Roughly speaking, yes, that's what happened. But I believe Shona is the best person to teach Callum about love, respect, and the responsibilities of adulthood. I beg to differ, I said. All he learned was desire, disrespect, and recklessness. Desire for my wife, disrespect for me, and a disregard for consequences. What about the risk of pregnancy? That seems like a high price to pay for a moment of pleasure. The decision whether or not to take precautions rests with the gifted couple. Traditionally, women are gifted unconditionally, and many children in the Glen owe their existence to this practice, often enabling women who might not otherwise have had children to become mothers. Over centuries, these children have played a crucial role in repopulating the highlands, particularly after the World Wars, when being gifted provided some women with children after losing their husbands. So, Fiona, besides occasional complications like unintended pregnancies, are there other consequences for women who are gifted to young men? Not really. There have been only 1 or 2 minor issues. Overall, it's usually a positive experience. Sometimes we step in if there seems to be a potential problem. The most recent instance was when John and Mary MacDonald moved to Glasgow shortly after you arrived here. So that explains their departure. She seemed reluctant to leave, but he was eager to go. Yes, unfortunately, she became too emotionally attached to the young man she was gifted to and wanted to prolong the relationship beyond a year. So you're saying that she's not just in a casual relationship? Maybe you don't fully understand this, Rob. Gifts are not just a one-time reward for good behavior in adolescence. This encourages young people to stay in the Glen longer. Many young people are unsure about their future. The donation lasts for a year or until the young man leaves the Glen, whichever comes first. I was shocked. Are you seriously telling me that Callum is counting on a relationship with Shona for the next 12 months? Please try to understand, Rob. Giving has reduced the amount of unwanted harassment from young people because gifted women help them grow up, gain self-confidence, and become well-mannered. Yes, physical intimacy is present, but during this time the young man learns about women and relationships and becomes emotionally more prepared to face the world. This may sound acceptable to you, Fiona, but do you really think I'm just going to let Callum keep going out with Shona like this? The pigs will fly away sooner than I will allow it. Look, Rob, I know you're upset, but this is part of Shona's legacy as a Glen McGandy woman. She doesn't really have a choice, and it's temporary. Feel free to talk to her about it, but I wouldn't recommend taking a hard line. Issuing ultimatums rarely leads to productive negotiations. It seemed to me that our conversation was coming to an end, and I stood up. I think I should go, Fiona. I listened to what you had to say and tried to understand, but my point of view hasn't changed much. If anything, it's only gotten worse. Thanks for the tea and the conversation. Fiona walked me to the door. Don't do anything rash, Rob. And remember, I'm always glad that you can come and talk to me. I was considering whether Fiona would inform Shona in advance that I was aware of what was happening. I would have preferred the advantage of surprising her completely, but that was because I wanted to see Shona's natural and unfiltered reaction. When Robbie and Shona returned from church, I couldn't be certain if she knew I had discovered her secret. but she did appear somewhat subdued. Robbie loved bacon rolls for Sunday lunch, a favorite of his, and we amused ourselves by ensuring his enthusiasm didn't cause any major spills, especially with tomato ketchup, which he struggled to control. After lunch, I settled Robbie in the lounge where he happily played with his toy cars. Then I returned to the kitchen to talk to Shona. She observed me closely as I sat down again at the table, suggesting she anticipated what was coming. I decided not to mince words. Looking directly at her, I said, "I know about you and Callum." She sighed. "I know you know," she replied. "Why did you do it, Shona?" I asked. "Because I am a woman of Glen McGandy, Rob," she explained. "You can take the woman out of the Glen, but you can't take the Glen out of the woman. It's my duty and my fate to carry on our heritage. We cannot simply discard over 2.5 centuries of tradition that has been passed down through generations of women and protects the foundations of our community." "But didn't you consider the implications for us?" "Of course I did. I'm sorry if you're upset, but you know I love you just as I know you love me. You have to understand that what I'm doing doesn't threaten what we have together." "I fail to see how you can say that," I replied. "I'm struggling to grasp your perspective, Shona. You've committed adultery and our marriage is in serious trouble." "Please don't view it that way, Rob. I'm hopeful we can work things out and you'll see our marriage is still strong. I knew there was a chance you'd find out, but I didn't expect it so soon, so I might not be as prepared for this conversation as I should be. The thing is, I'm not having an affair with Callum because there's no love between us. I'm simply rewarding him for good behavior and mentoring him in life skills. This won't affect you and me in any meaningful way if you think about it." "Could you explain your reasoning?" I asked. "Nothing significant will change. As long as you are here, I will always be with you. I'll keep an eye on Callum when you're away, and you won't see him when you get back. You barely see each other anyway. On weekends, he usually goes out with friends, either at football in Inverness or at some music festival. That's not going to change." "But you're asking me to share you with Callum?" "I don't think so, Rob. You will continue to receive all the love and affection that I have always given you. I'm 32 years old and I still have a lot of opportunities. I'm not going to take anything from you to give to Callum. What he gets will just be an addition to what I can provide." "I think we'll have to agree or disagree. I know you don't belong to me, but you're my wife and I'm your husband. I cannot accept that you can temporarily renounce your marriage vows of loyalty to me." "That's a highly specialized view, Rob. I thought you'd be able to see through the small details and understand what we're aiming for. It is a great honor for me. I was chosen to help this boy grow up. This is something special. And he is the son of the chief." "You make it sound like it's some kind of solemn ritual or deep experience, Shona, but really it's just an affair with a young guy who wanted intimacy with you and to have you available whenever he wants. I don't think you're teaching him anything more." "That may be how you look at it, Rob, but this is a unique agreement. Many other women have gone this way before me, and their husbands have generally supported them, realizing that this is a small sacrifice for the sake of peace and prosperity in the valley." "So what if a husband objects?" "Most husbands understand they just need to ignore it, so they usually don't object. Occasionally, though, a husband does object and ends up leaving the Glen. Ultimately, it's the women who decide what happens here." "That sounds like an ultimatum," I remarked. "Fiona warned me against giving you one, so I'm surprised you might be considering it." "I'm not trying to force you into anything, Rob. Actually, it would be best for everyone if you didn't take action, including yourself. This is all very new for you, so you probably need some time to think." "I think we both need time to think this through, Shona. I have an idea of what I need to do, but I'll wait a few days if you agree to keep your distance from Callum for now." I didn't wait for her response, instead heading to the lounge to see if Robbie wanted to go for our usual Sunday afternoon walk. It was our tradition, giving Shona some time alone while Robbie and I spent time together. These hours were precious to me, especially since I couldn't be home much during the work week. Robbie and I often ended up by the lock, watching wading birds in the reedy shallows. His favorite was the gray heron, with its long legs, beak, and distinctive feathering. That afternoon, he was delighted to spot a solitary heron standing perfectly still, its neck bent and head tucked in, almost as if hiding from the world. Shona and I barely exchanged words for the rest of the day. Both of us tried to engage Robbie in conversation instead. He eagerly spoke to Shona about the heron and discussed his plans for the upcoming week. I don't think Robbie noticed the tension that evening. From what I could tell, Shona remained quiet, hoping to diffuse the situation and wait for me to soften my stance. Little did she know I was seething with anger, but keeping it under control through sheer willpower, avoiding any further discussions. I felt powerless about Shona possibly disregarding my request concerning Callum. As I packed my bag that evening, thoughts of what it would be like to permanently leave home weighed heavily on my mind. The emotional turmoil was almost unbearable. It felt as though our family had been in a terrible accident and I had lost the wife I loved. All I had left was my son. I was desperate not to lose him too. I needed time to comprehend the situation and figure out my next steps. The next morning, I woke up early with the intention to leave before Shona got up. As I finished my coffee and put on my jacket, she appeared in her dressing gown. Her eyes were swollen and red, suggesting she hadn't slept well. "Drive safely, Rob," she said as I headed towards the door. "Remember, I love you. Let's talk later this week." "Okay, Shona," I replied. I was determined not to let her hear the word love from me. Reflecting on it now, I believe I spent the beginning of that week feeling numb and shocked. I didn't contact home and didn't receive any messages from Shona, but that wasn't uncommon. I often found myself in remote areas with unreliable phone service, which was why we were focused on upgrading the telecom infrastructure. Thursday evening arrived, much like any other Thursday, with me settled into the company's serviced apartment in Inverness. It was far more comfortable than a standard hotel room, equipped with familiar comforts, including a good selection of whiskeys. I was just wrapping up my reports for the upcoming management meeting when the doorbell rang around 7 p.m. Opening the door, I found Lady Fiona standing there. She was dressed for the chilly evening in what I'd call a country estate ensemble, a dark green Barber jacket, thick khaki slacks, and sturdy knee-high brown leather boots. Her British racing green Range Rover SUV was likely parked outside the apartments, complementing her attire. "Good evening, Rob. Apologies for the unannounced visit. May I come in?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, welcoming her into the lounge. She removed her jacket, revealing a plain white blouse and beige cardigan, and settled into an armchair. Though her presence wasn't entirely unexpected, I still had to inquire. "Did you drive all the way to Inverness just to see me, Fiona?" "More or less. I met with my daughter this afternoon, but you're the main reason I'm here. I'd appreciate a cup of tea if that's all right, and then perhaps we can discuss things." I entered the kitchen and set the kettle to boil. Making tea isn't just about being hospitable. It's also a quintessentially British way of dealing with difficulties. When faced with bad news, we Brits tend to maintain composure with a stiff upper lip and a boiling kettle. I had a sense of unease about Fiona's visit, but brewing the tea gave me a moment to ponder why she had come. She wasn't young anymore, dressed quite conservatively. I was sure her visit wasn't about seduction, but it seemed she had an agenda, and I hoped it wasn't unwelcome news. Back in the living room after a sip of tea, Fiona got straight to the point. "Let's not beat around the bush, Rob. I've been discussing our situation with Shona, and I believe we might be able to find a resolution of sorts. That's why I'm here." "I'm not sure it'll be that simple, Fiona, but thank you for coming. It sounds like you bring some good news. Does this mean you've reconsidered Shona's offer?" "Not exactly, Rob, but we've thought a lot about your position and tried to empathize with your viewpoint. Shona and I recognize that we misjudged your reaction, and now we're exploring ways to mend things." "I don't see how that's possible. if Shona continues her relationship with Callum. I won't be sidetracked by semantics, Rob, but I'd appreciate it if you refrained from swearing. I understand you're upset, but I'd prefer if you said being with Callum instead of using the F word. Very well, Fiona, but if she continues to give herself to Callum, how does that solve anything? That's the issue we were grappling with, but then we realized we were only considering one side of the situation. We thought about your perspective and tried to see it from your point of view. You saw Shona gaining something while you felt you were losing out in some way. That's not exactly how I see it, Fiona, but I appreciate you trying to understand. Thank you, Rob. I hope you'll approve of the solution we've devised. So what is it, Fiona? Heather. Yes, Rob. My daughter, Heather. She lives here and can attend to your needs in Inverness, while Shona is caring for her brother in Glenmagandy. I stared at her in astonishment. Are you serious? Absolutely. She thinks highly of you and would be more than willing to help. In fact, I believe she's quite enthusiastic about the idea. I was shocked. Until then, I had held on to a glimmer of hope that Fiona might inform me they had decided to cancel Shona's arrangement. Instead, she was suggesting her own daughter to me in an attempt to make amends. Fiona knew she had caught me off guard and waited to gauge my interest, her head tilted slightly and an eyebrow raised expectantly. In that moment, clarity swept away the mental fog. The sadness and despair of the past days gave way to cold, seething anger. I realized my marriage was beyond saving, but also resolved to settle scores with those who had betrayed me, though I kept my thoughts guarded. That's quite a proposition, Fiona, I said evenly. If I understand correctly, you're saying that regardless, Shona will be given to Callum, and you're proposing Heather to balance the scales. She nodded. That sums it up, Rob. All right, Fiona. I'm not sure what to say now. I need time to think this through and talk to Shona this weekend. We'll see where we go from here. Fair enough, Rob. I suppose that's the best we could hope for. Thanks for the tea, she said, rising. I'll be staying at Heather's place tonight. She handed me a slip of paper. Here's her number, she added. I'll let her know you might reach out. Returning to Glenmagandy that Friday evening, my mind was occupied with what lay ahead. In the immediate future, I needed to ascertain whether Shona intended to continue her relationship with Callum, regardless of my input. If my wife was set on maintaining an intimate connection with someone else, it seemed unlikely that she considered the implications for our own relationship. Additionally, I faced a decision regarding Heather McDarrell's proposition, pondering whether to accept it as some form of consolation. Once these pressing matters were addressed, I could then strategize for my own long-term well-being. When I arrived home, Shona appeared visibly tense. I suspect she was relieved when Robbie took up much of my attention for an hour before bedtime. In the meantime, she attempted to recreate the delightful evening we had shared exactly a week earlier. She brought me a cold beer while Robbie chattered away, and then busied herself in the kitchen preparing a ragu bolognese. Later, after Robbie had been put to bed, Shona uncorked a bottle of barbaridasti, and we settled down to eat. I had a rough idea of what our conversation would entail, but I left it to Shona to start. Fiona mentioned she spoke with you last night. What did you think of the solution we devised? She inquired. It's not what I was hoping for, I replied. Did you meet up with Callum while I was away this week? She looked away, avoiding eye contact. I'm sorry, Rob. He proposed, and I can't simply reject him. So you're proceeding as Fiona predicted? She seemed uneasy, yet resolute. Yes, she murmured, nodding to affirm her decision. I understand you're unhappy about this, Rob, but it's something I feel compelled to do. I wanted to give her one last opportunity to reconsider. I hear your reasons, but I still don't grasp why you think this is necessary, Shona. I won't pressure you or issue ultimatums because this has to be your choice. I can't stop you, but are you certain you can handle whatever follows? Yes, Rob. I know it will be tough, but I believe I can. It's not permanent, and I won't hold it against you if you decide to even things out. I believe you're making a significant decision, Shona, and it appears your mind is made up. Is there anything I can say or do to change that? No, Rob. I don't think that was ever a possibility, she replied. You see, what I didn't mention is that I myself am a child of an arrangement. I wouldn't exist if it weren't for it. My mother had special abilities, and I am the result of that. My biological father was the young man she was connected to through this arrangement. That's how I came to be gifted. It was almost inevitable that I would inherit it. Wait a moment, Shona. You told me your father passed away in a car accident while your mother was pregnant with you. Are you saying he wasn't your biological father? Yes, she confirmed. It's true that my mother's husband, my father, died in a car accident that ended in him going off a cliff. I don't know all the details, but he was well insured, so we didn't face financial difficulties. I don't think my mom ever fully recovered from his death. She shared the truth about my biological father with me when I was a teenager, so I would understand why my medical records didn't match what I might have expected. It's an interesting story, Shona, but I still don't understand why it made you start a relationship with this guy. Rob, this is my destiny. Giftedness led to my existence, and my existence led to me becoming gifted. I realized that there was nothing more I could say to change her mind, so I just nodded. We ate in silence for a while, each lost in his own thoughts. Still, I had one more important question to ask. From now on, I don't want Robbie to have any contact with Callum or his family. Can you promise me that? I asked her. Of course, she replied quickly, feigning an uncertain hint of a smile. I'm not sure if she interpreted this as my acceptance of our new situation, but for me it was just an attempt to avoid the consequences. I was determined to protect my son from any unusual behavior that might affect his young mind. Even then, it was not easy to cope with the upcoming changes in our family. Later that evening, I decided to treat myself to an 18-year-old Glenfarclas single malt whiskey, finding solace in the fact that we were watching meaningless chatter on a television talk show. By the time we parted around midnight, I felt like a huge burden had been lifted from me, and almost immediately fell asleep. I don't know if Shona was sleeping soundly, but deep down I knew that my subconscious realized that the die had been cast and change was inevitable. On Sunday morning, I informed Shona that I wouldn't accompany her and Robbie to church anymore. I couldn't bring myself to pretend everything was fine and play the role of a contented husband. She probably understood my reasons for not joining them, though not entirely. Why won't you come to church? She asked. Have you lost your faith? No, but I don't feel his presence, I replied. Instead, I'll take a walk in the hills. If God exists, perhaps I'll find him there. That Sunday morning, I didn't actually go hill walking. Instead, while Shona and Robbie were out, I used the opportunity to move my belongings into the guest bedroom. Shona didn't realize what I had done until we retired for the night. I made sure to go to bed first, lights off, and by the time Shona peeked into the guest room, I was already settled in. Rob, she inquired, what are you doing here? It's pretty obvious, Shona, I retorted. I won't share a bed with you if you're sharing one with Callum McDarrell. Oh, come on, Rob. Really? Absolutely, Shona. I won't make a scene about it, but you'll need to accept it or I'll move out. For Robbie's sake, I hope it doesn't come to that. She frowned, lips tightening in annoyance. Fine, Rob, if that's how it's going to be. I think you're being a bit unreasonable. You know where to find me if you change your mind. The following week, when I hit the road again, I decided not to have an intimate relationship with Heather McDarrell as compensation for my wife's temporary absence. I refused to accept the ridiculous idea that this leads to some strange equation of adultery. There's no chance. I intended to be with Heather solely for my own pleasure, provided that she would not be pressured to offer herself to me. You see, I have long learned to make the most of a difficult situation. Then, my girlfriend categorically disliked my smoking habit. She compared my kisses to the kisses of an ashtray and insisted that I choose between her and cigarettes. I understood her point of view, so I decided to quit smoking, although it wasn't easy. The first 2 months were especially difficult, and I was irritable, like a bear with a sore head. Eventually, she lost interest in me and we parted ways. How was I able to make the most of this situation? As you may have guessed. I never smoked cigarettes again, and as a result I became healthier and fitter. Shauna's affair with Callum has become another difficult situation. No matter what I did, it wouldn't have saved my marriage. So how could I make the most of it? Well, starting with Heather McDarrell seemed like a good idea to me. I called her on Wednesday and we agreed to have dinner in Inverness on Thursday. I could just invite her to my house, but that's not my style. I wanted to be alone with her and talk, not just physically touch her. Moreover, I needed to have a serious conversation with her if we wanted to continue to meet regularly. We got to know each other much better over dinner. Besides being a strikingly beautiful young woman, she turned out to be an intelligent and fascinating conversationalist. She mentioned that in September she will start her last year at the university, which will require a lot of time from her to study. She was currently working for the summer at a well-known firm of chartered accountants in Inverness. Her boyfriend, Donnie, who studies agriculture at UHI, spent the summer on the farm, so they only saw each other on weekends. This arrangement allowed her to freely communicate with me as friends when I was staying in Inverness for a week. She smiled broadly when she shared it with me. I couldn't help but feel sympathy for Donnie, even though she assured me that they weren't exceptional. I suspected that he might have a different view on this. Heather made her own decision without any pressure from her mother, so I drove her home that Thursday night. It's been almost 8 years since I last had anyone but Shauna. Heather was much younger than me, so I assumed that it would be difficult for me to keep up with her, and I was not sure that my age would be an obstacle. As it turned out, I was wrong on both points. Heather had never been particularly intimate before. She jumped at the chance to have a short-term, non-committal relationship with a man she could trust, which is exactly how her mother described me. That first night, I showed her everything at the highest level. After that, we hugged for a while. She explained that she couldn't stay the night with me because she was renting an apartment with 2 other women and wanted to avoid gossip. I respected her decision and ordered a taxi for her while she was getting dressed. Although I offered to give her a ride home, she thought it would be too immodest. We kissed goodbye, and she said that she really enjoyed spending time together and she was looking forward to the next meeting. That Friday, I took a break from work to consult with a lawyer, preparing myself for the potential consequences of my planned actions. As summer transitioned into autumn, both positive and negative changes unfolded. My relationship with Shona shifted. Despite her continued involvement with Callum McDarrell, I maintained a cordial demeanor towards her. I diligently carried out household chores as before, yet displayed little affection when we were together and avoided interactions with her friends and family. Instead, my focus turned towards bonding with young Robbie, even when all 3 of us were together. For instance, on our outings, I happily held hands with Robbie, but not with her. Despite this, we still managed to enjoy weekends together, taking Robbie on picnics in the hills, or driving to the coast to indulge in fresh lobster or crab from a quaint fishing village. I believe Shona understood why I distanced myself from her, though she may have viewed it as a temporary measure. We appeared to silently agree not to broach the subject of her affair or the state of our marriage. This arrangement suited me perfectly, as I had already made up my mind and didn't want to reveal my intentions too soon. Meanwhile, my relationship with Heather McDarrell was heating up. Every Thursday when I stayed overnight in Inverness, we would meet up. She would come to my apartment, cook dinner, and spend the night. Heather had concocted a cover story for her flatmates, telling them she was staying with an elderly aunt every Thursday. Heather's intimate abilities have improved significantly. I suspected Donnie was also enjoying Heather's newfound knowledge and skills, especially after she mentioned that he might propose to her. Donnie had no idea about our arrangement, but since Heather hadn't worn any rings yet, I was happy to continue our romance. Around mid-September, things took a turn for the worse. While making breakfast one Sunday morning, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone vomiting in the bathroom. Shortly after, a very pale Shona appeared in the kitchen, clutching her robe and leaning against the doorway. "Rob, could you do me a favor and make me some weak tea?" she asked, her voice strained. "No milk or sugar. I'm going to lie down." "Of course, Shona," I replied calmly. "No problem. By the way, how are you feeling?" Her shoulders slumped as she sighed deeply. "I don't know," she admitted. "Let's talk later." She turned to leave, and I filled the kettle. As far as I knew, Shona spent most of that Sunday in bed. The weather was beautiful, so Robbie and I took my car and went on a short trip to enjoy the stunning autumn foliage in the area. We stopped at a charming country inn for Sunday lunch and returned home in the late afternoon. Robbie had collected some fallen leaves to show his mother, who was sitting quietly in the living room dressed casually in sweatpants and a loose sweater. I prepared dinner while Robbie talked with Shona, who did her best to keep up with his enthusiasm as he explained how deciduous tree leaves change color after summer. I felt proud that he remembered what I had taught him, even about how in some countries people call autumn fall because of the leaves falling from the trees. Later that night, after Robbie had gone to bed, Shona and I had a serious conversation, although it mostly involved her outlining her vision for the future. Earlier in the week, she had vomited and visited the local doctor, confirming she was in the early stages of pregnancy, likely 6 to 8 weeks along. She hadn't informed Callum yet that he was going to be a father, because he had decided to accept an offer at the University of Edinburgh and would be leaving the Glen next week. "So now you expect me to just forget it all?" I asked. "You knew it was temporary, Rob," she replied. "It's over now that Callum is leaving for Edinburgh." "I don't see how you think we can just go back," I responded. "Besides the weeks and months you spent with Callum, there's a baby on the way." "I'm asking for your forgiveness and to move forward," she pleaded. "You're a wonderful husband and father, Rob. This baby needs a loving family, and I hope you'll see that." "That's not how I see it," I said. "Callum and you need to face the consequences of your actions. I can't take responsibility for your child." "But the baby won't burden us," she insisted. "It'll be good for Robbie to have a sibling. And financially, it won't be a strain." "I'm not interested in reconciling," I told her firmly. "I won't take on parental responsibility for your child." She looked shocked, then burst into tears. "How can you be so cruel?" she cried, and left the room in tears. I arranged for Shona to receive the papers a few days later while I was away. The divorce petition detailed the time and place of her affair with Callum McDarrell and mentioned she was pregnant with his child. Despite any illusions she may have harbored, I anticipated Shona would now understand the consequences of her actions. Shona called me upon receiving the papers, sounding distraught and incoherent. Essentially, she questioned how I could be so harsh, to which I retorted, "And you weren't cruel to me?" I chose not to return to Lochmagandy that weekend, because I couldn't bear to live under the same roof as Shona, which might suggest our marriage wasn't irreparably broken. It was a difficult decision, but I hoped to soon be able to visit Robbie for a few hours every weekend, even if it meant traveling back and forth from Inverness each time. The same day Shona was handed the divorce papers, I called Heather McDarrell and informed her that Shona and I were breaking up and that our friends with benefits agreement had been terminated. Although I enjoyed being with Heather, I wanted to avoid any complications, especially if her boyfriend Donnie was serious about their relationship. Over the next few months, many people tried to intervene, including Lady Fiona, who accused me of violating what she believed was an agreement between us. I explained that I had never promised not to divorce Shona. From my point of view, Heather entered into a non-committal relationship simply because she liked me. I doubted Lady Fiona would allow the details of her daughter's affair with me to be used against her in the divorce proceedings. In Scotland, I knew from a prior conversation with a lawyer that divorce could be obtained after 2 years of separation, even without spousal agreement. Instead of pursuing this route, I opted to allege adultery, specifically naming Callum McDarrell. My decision wasn't arbitrary. While it did bring me some satisfaction to publicly identify him, my primary concern was avoiding legal responsibility for Shona's child. By divorcing swiftly, I aimed to evade any potential parental duties. Though family lawyers are often seen as opportunistic, I made a fair proposal allowing Shona to retain the cottage in Lochmagandy and committed to regular child support payments until Robbie reached adulthood. Both legal teams attempted to prolong proceedings for financial gain, delaying our divorce by several months. Eventually, Shona agreed that our relationship was over. It appears she reached a financial settlement with Callum and his family. Her pregnancy went smoothly, culminating in the birth of a daughter in late April, shortly after our divorce was finalized. I leased a compact apartment in Inverness long-term and commuted to Lochmagandy every other Saturday to spend the day with Robbie. I wasn't keen on hearing about Shona's life updates, but Robbie was thrilled to have a little sister, and both Shona and I made sure to nurture his role as a caring and affectionate older brother. I made it clear to Shona that I wouldn't participate in any family activities beyond visiting Robbie. She attempted to involve me a few times, but eventually gave up. After that, Robbie was always ready when I arrived, so I minimized my time with Shona and her baby. I remained polite, but our conversations never extended beyond the weather or Robbie's school performance. Life moved on, and I adjusted to a different social routine. I had more personal time, including some romantic encounters, though I wasn't seeking a serious relationship. Strangely, this seemed to attract several women, but I avoided those known for being overly promiscuous. Time passed, and a few years later I came across a local newspaper article announcing Callum McDarrell's engagement to a young lady he had met during their time at Edinburgh University. She hailed from a wealthy background, her family being landed gentry residing in a grand old mansion on their estate in either Sussex or Surrey. According to the paper, she was considered quite a catch, and the article hinted at a romantic tale reminiscent of Beauty and the Beast, with the untamed Scottish Highlander won over by the aristocratic English beauty. Before she embarked on her marital journey, I decided to visit her in Edinburgh. Finding her wasn't too challenging, and she was intrigued enough about my purpose to agree to meet in a secure location. We chose one of Edinburgh's charming old pubs, where the hum of conversations filled the air, making it difficult to eavesdrop unless you were seated nearby. I recognized her from her photograph in the newspaper, and soon we were seated in a cozy booth with a couple of drinks. "What's this all about, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, unaware that I was using an alias. "I apologize for the secrecy, but I have some information regarding Callum McDarrell that I think you should know," I said. "There's no need to worry. It's not as dire as you might fear, and you'll be able to verify everything I'm about to tell you." "Please go ahead," she said. "I'm listening, but I hope this isn't some kind of scam." "Not at all," I replied. "Let me ask you, how well do you know Callum's daughter?" She looked puzzled. "What are you talking about?" "Didn't he mention his daughter to you?" I asked. "No." "Well, I suppose you'll meet her in due time," I said. "She lives in Lochmagandy with her mother." "I find that hard to believe. Are you sure he has a daughter?" "He's never mentioned having a daughter from a previous relationship. We've visited his parents in Lochmagandy several times, and neither he nor they have ever said anything about him having a daughter. Callum's daughter lives with her mom and older stepbrother about half a mile from Callum's parents' place," I explained. "Her name is Flora, she just turned 5, and she'll be starting school in the fall. From what I hear, she's a lovely little girl, and I'm sure you'll get along with her, even though supporting her for the next 20 years might strain your finances a bit." She regarded me with a composed gaze. "Do you have any evidence to back up what you're telling me?" I passed her a copy of the divorce decree, detailing Shona's affair with Callum. "You could easily have someone verify this," I suggested. It took her some time to review the crucial details, but her displeasure was evident. "I can't believe he never mentioned this," she remarked. "We're supposed to be getting married, and now I find out he has a daughter from a past relationship with a single mother who lives nearby." "I'm sorry if this is coming as a surprise," I offered. "This information is public record, so you probably could have discovered it on your own. Maybe he planned to tell you before the wedding. Regardless, please don't let him know how you found out. It's important for you to know now rather than later, especially if you're going to marry him and share his commitments and responsibilities." "I'll need some time to think about all of this, Mr. Johnson," she replied. "Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Can I keep this?" she asked, referring to the decree. "Of course," I assured her. "It's yours." As she left the crowded pub, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I knew I wouldn't see her again, and if things went as I suspected, Callum McDarrell wouldn't be seeing much of her either. About a month later, while picking up Robbie, I casually mentioned to Shona that I'd seen in the paper that Callum McDarrell was getting married. "Oh, he was," she confirmed, eyeing me suspiciously. "But someone told his fiancée about Flora, and she called it off. I hope it wasn't you, Rob." "Me?" I replied innocently. "Why would I do something like that?" Later that year, I had another intriguing conversation with a stranger at a pub. One of my colleagues overheard me discussing the breathtaking views from Hawk Magandi and insisted on introducing me to his uncle, who claimed to have extensively hiked in that area when he was younger. This charming elderly gentleman turned out to have been good friends with John Mackey, whom Shona referred to as her father, but who tragically died in a car accident before Shona was born. He was surprised to learn that I had been married to Shona and asked me why we had divorced. I briefly explained how she had an affair and became pregnant with another man's child. "Well, well," he remarked, "the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Rob." "What do you mean?" "Did you know John Mackey wasn't Shona's biological father?" I inquired. "Yes," he nodded solemnly. "And unfortunately, John Mackey knew it too. Otherwise, he might still be alive." "I thought he died in a car accident," I responded, curious about his words. "That's what the insurance company concluded," he explained. "But the reality is quite different. Upon hearing your story, I believe I can confide in you. John came to see me after discovering his wife was having an affair. I tried to console him, but he was utterly devastated. I never revealed what he told me, and his wife never knew he found out, because on his way home that day, John drove his car off a cliff. I chose to keep silent, but I often wonder if there was more I could have done to help him. I think he simply couldn't bear what she had done." The old man paused, clearly reflecting on his friend John Mackey, and then looked directly at me, saying, "I'm grateful that you're not like poor John." I dedicated considerable effort to my work and eventually became the head of the Scottish Highlands infrastructure team for a multinational telecoms company. Landing that position brought me immense satisfaction, even though I wasn't particularly happy at the time. Things started looking up, but I believe the healing process truly began when I met Ursula. She's a straightforward German woman from Hamburg who divorced her husband after he cheated with his personal assistant. She wanted a fresh start in the Scottish Highlands, drawn by her love for hill walking and shared life philosophies. Ursula is assertive and doesn't tolerate foolishness, which some might find intimidating, but many consider her attractive. We've been living together for 3 years now, though we're both hesitant to formalize our relationship. Robbie turned 18 last month, and will soon begin university in Inverness. In the meantime, he spends most of his free time with Heather McDarrell at Shona's place in Lochmagandy. Robbie requested Heather as his partner, a request she couldn't refuse, given her position as the future chieftain committing to continue the tradition of partnering despite any repercussions. I see Robbie at least once a week when he stays with us in Inverness. Over the past year, I've spent considerable time discussing the traditions with him. He now understands why I divorced his mother and why I've chosen to distance myself from her and his stepsister, Flora. It was challenging for him to come to terms with his mother's actions and those of her associates, but he eagerly seized the opportunity to be with Heather for almost a year. Robbie's choice of Heather wasn't random. I recommended her for the job. I wonder if she realizes I influenced her decision to consider adultery. On a lighter note, it amuses me that she'll teach him things I once taught her. Robbie condemns her for breaking vows, yet he agrees she's enjoyable and plans to make the most of it. Heather's husband, Donnie, yes, that Donnie, manages an animal feed supply company with a depot in Inverness. They reside in Lochmagandy, though Donnie often travels for work. Married for 10 years, they have a lovely 6-year-old daughter who spends time with her grandmother, Lady Fiona. I doubt Donnie knows about their affair, and I won't be the one to tell him yet. I'll wait until Robbie grows tired of her, then we'll see how Donnie reacts. Despite his friendly demeanor, Donnie is a shrewd businessman unlikely to tolerate betrayal easily. I don't think he'd blame Robbie, but I wouldn't be surprised if things get heated.